This week on the PitchBook Podcast, Zac pitches The Intelligence Trap by David Robson, and I pitch King of the Journeymen by Peter Buckley. Batter up! Okay, Zac, you watched something that I've been interested in, but I have not seen it because I'm worried it will be unsatisfying. Take it away. What did you watch, and tell me why I should watch it?
Okay, so the other night I was putting in I'm putting in some speakers downstairs in our basement to do some surround sound, and while I was working, I thought I may as well turn the TV on and be watching something, and I saw this Bye Bye Barry. It's a Barry Sanders documentary. Who I know he was I don't know if he's a Hall of Famer. I think he's a Hall of
Oh yeah,
Famer.
for sure, for sure.
Yeah, Hall of Famer running back, had 2,000 rushing yards in one season in his career, but never won a World Series. Never, I'm really sportsy. Never won a Super Bowl.
He didn't win a World Series either, as far as I know.
Or a World Series. Yeah, he wasn't as good as Bo Jackson. Okay,
Got it. Got
but
it.
he's pretty good. But watching it, I was like, I really like this guy. He is so humble and not a fake humility. He is a very humble person.
Yeah. So just some background. My wife is a huge Lions fan, so I know you were thinking about Cammy the whole time. She likes the Lions because when she was a kid, she asked her brother what football team she should like, and he loved Barry Sanders. So she unfortunately has been a Lions fan ever since, and has had a lot of sad
Un-
years.
Unfortunately.
But Barry Sanders was awesome. I definitely remember being shocked when he retired. Um, so I do want to watch this, but from what I've heard, there's not a lot of resolution as to why he actually quits. Do they kind of answer that, or not really?
They spend some time trying to dig there a little bit.
But he doesn't say why. He doesn't just come out and say why.
He doesn't he talks about it a little bit. He just felt like it was time.
Huh.
That was it. Most of these guys will drag out their careers. Like if I can get another 5 million, if I can get another 10 million or 50 million, um, they keep dragging it out. They'll retire, fake
Yep.
retire, and then they come back and
Come
fake
back.
retire. Do you know how he actually retired? Do you know what method?
Fax machine, right?
A fax machine. He
Yeah.
faxed his resignation letter to the Detroit Lions and then flew to England.
I remember
Which you
when
gotta respect. I mean, you love London.
I do. I do. I'm a big.
He just like gets on a plane and leaves.
He's like, I'm out of here. I remember even thinking a fax machine was old when Jordan faxed over that he said he was back. Hey, by the way, the cat wants to say hi.
Oh,
kitty.
cute.
He likes to climb all over the desk. All right. Anyway, yeah. So the fax, I remember that thinking like he faxed it in 1999, right? Which
So.
seems old, even for that time. You know what I mean? The fax machine.
No, I think I don't know
You
when
think
faxes
so?
went away. Yeah, I think people are still using them.
Well, that's all digital now, but
You can fax it in. I'm like, I don't even have a fax number or a
right.
way to fax.
Yeah.
It's like
Anyway.
e-fax, which why don't we just email? But anyway, just one of the things that really impressed me, and then we can jump into the books here, was when he would score a touchdown, he would run the ball to the ref and hand the ball to the
Yep.
ref.
Yeah.
No dancing, no spiking. He would just like his way was you just saw me score a touchdown, like that's enough.
Well,
And he
and
would
the
just
way
hand the ball
he
to the ref and then jog away.
and the way he scores touchdowns was unbelievable. So
Oh,
if
he's
anybody
just like
doesn't know Barry Sanders, go check out some YouTube highlights because he was unbelievable to watch.
so
It's
good.
crazy. Yeah.
They called him he was a pinball.
Yeah.
He would just like bounce off of players and just keep going. I mean, the guy was just a ball of muscle, just huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fun to watch. They do a lot of running plays in the documentary. It's really good.
Yeah. For sure. All right, my cat's walking all over again. Sorry. All right. So tell me about the book, because my book is about an athlete, but maybe
Okay.
the exact opposite of Barry Sanders. So
Okay.
tell me a little bit about The Intelligence Trap. I have never heard of this book. I don't know anything about it. but I like the title.
All
It's
right.
intriguing.
I found this book. I follow. It's I think library. I can't remember the name of the Instagram page, but sometimes they'll just have a list of top 20 books you should read in your lifetime. So I was going through, saw The Intelligence Trap, and I thought that looks interesting. So I picked it up, read through it. It's a book that you can pick any page and just start reading, and it's just interesting. It's full of science and data and stories, but it starts out with talking about cognitive IQ tests. So when we think about what would you say is a way to indicate if someone is intelligent?
Oh. For me,
It's a tough one, right?
yeah. I mean, the IQ test is classic. I've never taken one,
Okay.
but you and I both know some pretty smart folks that maybe are kind of what you consider book smart, but not necessarily social.
Yes.
Why
Yeah.
socially? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
Anyway,
fair. That's fair.
but I would say to be able to recall details and to kind of make complex things seem simple. Those are the those are some of the things I would think about if you're asking me how I judge intelligence. Be able to
Yeah.
communicate difficult ideas in a simple way. Be able to recall things. I don't know. I don't have an answer.
No, I think that's good. And this hasn't always been known. In 1921, Lewis Terman, he took the IQ test. At the time, it was being used to kind of, I don't want to say filter out, but those with lower IQs, that's what they were trying to score for to get
Hmm.
them in more special needs programs.
Hmm.
And he said, well, why don't we use the IQ test to find kids that are like in the upper range
Hmm.
and follow them throughout their lives. And so they called these kids that the average score was 140, which is pretty high. I mean, that's
That's for the good kid, the intelligent kids.
high, yeah, higher
Okay, got
higher
it.
higher score. And the top end of the range I think was 192. There
Okay.
was a 10-year-old girl that they found that by the age of 10 she had read 1,400 books. Another girl that was writing poems, and a San Francisco chronicler writer person confused her poetry with Tennyson. So these are really gifted kids.
Hmm.
So they called these kids the termites, and they followed them through their lives. And what was interesting is some of the kids had this label on them, and they were a little self-conscious about it because they were intelligent. In their lives, they never really achieved what we would call success. They didn't become famous, or they didn't become really wealthy. They just kind of lived average or maybe less than average lives despite having these really high IQs.
Hmm.
So they thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Just because you have a high IQ doesn't necessarily equate to future success. And
It's good news for
um,
me. Good news for me.
I know, reading it, I was like, man, I think I got a 65. So I'm liking this. I mean, if you read the book, it kind of makes you feel good about your insecurities if you scored low on the IQ test. So one of the stories, the mathematician and economist John von Neumann was renowned for his exceptional intellect and contributed significantly to various fields, including mathematics, physics, and computer science. However, despite his extraordinary intelligence, he fell victim to several cognitive biases. Um, Newman's biases were evident in his overconfidence in assessing the probability of a successful nuclear attack. During the Cold War era, von Neumann believed that the chances of a successful interception of incoming nuclear missiles were much higher than they actually were, leading to potential miscalculations and flawed strategic planning. So here's someone with a very high IQ test, placed in probably one of the most important roles in society, calculating what are the odds that the planet is going to get nuked, and his stats are a little off. So extremely intelligent. So this book is really talking about we can get trapped. When I say we, I mean not me, but it people with high intelligence can get trapped in that intelligence and form these walls of biases around them
Hmm.
that create an overconfidence in their decision making. So in the 1980s, Robert Sternberg comes along, and he's known for developing the triarchic theory of intelligence rather than the triarchic theory of successful intelligence. Sternberg proposed the triarchic theory of intelligence in the 1980s as a framework to understand intelligence beyond traditional measures. So it goes beyond academic or cognitive abilities, incorporating practical skills, creativity, and the ability to adapt to one's environment successfully. So when I asked you that a question about, I was kind of leading you there,
Mm-hmm.
thinking, most people are going to say your IQ, but you were like, well, what about
Yeah.
your EQ, your
Right.
emotional
Right.
quotient, creativity? Because there are incredibly talented people that are very creative and very successful. Like I would say Taylor Swift is probably at the peak, someone who
Mm-hmm.
just writes hit after hit after hit just naturally. She does that. So she's got an incredible talent. So there are different types of intelligences, and sometimes people have both. They might have the emotional intelligence and the IQ, and they're blessed to have all of those kind of wrapped into one. So um, he goes on to talking about these different biases that as you have that overconfidence, we might employ entrenched automatic behaviors. Um, he talks about this symptom called dysrationalia, where your intelligence is kind of speaking in your mind louder than just what rational people would think the solution would be,
Hmm.
and placing too much confidence in our own judgment. So it's really interesting laying out the problem that our intelligence can sometimes get in the way, and we have to be very careful about how we approach making decisions.
What about so somebody who's got those three different things, whatever you call the try, whatever it's called, do they have fewer blinders, or do they have the same concerns or issues that they might have biases?
The same.
Okay, so you can be smart in one, really smart in one thing, IQ, or smart in all these three other things, and still have these issues.
That's right. And if
I've
you
never been happier to be dumb. This is great.
it's good news. Like
Yes, this is
smart.
good. This is good.
I know. I've heard the saying you're the smartest dumb person I know. You know? It's like, is that a compliment? And I don't know that
Sure.
it is.
I'm too stupid to know.
But if you are your entire life told you're so smart, you're so smart, you're so smart, you grow up not
Hmm.
ever having any doubt in your decision making abilities. You just think,
Hmm.
well, I've just been told I'm smart. There's a book called The Growth Mindset by Carol. Uh, I want to say it's Carol Dweck. Is that right?
I have no idea.
I'm, I'll have to look that up. So we'll have to make sure we give proper credit on the podcast. But it's called The Growth Mindset, and she talks about fixed mindsets versus growth mindsets.
Hmm.
When you tell a child they're smart, they're afraid to fail
Hmm.
because they always want to be told they're smart, versus telling a child you worked very hard, good job. They are okay to fail because they're getting rewarded when they just work hard, when they keep putting forth effort. So you can see that if you are told you're intelligent your entire life, you never really doubt, and there's not a lot of room for humility, that I might be wrong. I wonder if I approach this from a different angle, if I might get a different answer. You just assume what I decide is correct.
Hmm.
And there's a fear of being wrong, because you're intelligent doesn't always mean that you're going to be right.
So
Um,
looks like it's Carol Dweck, Dweck,
Dweck,
ECK.
that's it.
Is that how you say
Great,
it? Pronounce it? Yeah.
great book. Yeah, the growth mindset. Fantastic book. And she did a study on these different mindsets.
Interesting. Okay.
So,
Well, what is it? What are you applying to yourself? What
all
do
right.
you think? What
So
do
there,
you
there
go
yeah,
ahead?
there's a couple things that I wanted to just point out is some of the ways to kind of avoid your biased thinking and your overconfidence, that Robson lays out in the book is belief should always be revised in response to new information or evidence. I like to gather many different types of evidence before I decide. So being flexible in your decision making process, um, the idea that I'm wise because I know that I know nothing. So having some humility in your mindset, even if you are intelligent, accept the fact that you don't know everything. I posted something on our Instagram page the other day about that we're just designed to not know how little we know as human beings. We don't know everything. So even if you have a high IQ, just recognize that you don't know everything about everything.
Yeah.
So having some humility there. Taking time to consider the opposite viewpoint can reduce a range of reasoning errors. So triangulating with other people, bouncing ideas off. Where am I thinking about this the right way? Are there other ways to approach this? And then, depending on the magnitude of the decision, you may benefit from undergoing a few iterations of this process, each time reaching for an additional piece of information. So, working through the problem several times, triangulating, asking people different points of view, and then he also talks about self distancing, just backing away from the problem and pretending that it's not you. Even if you have a high intelligence, you are still human, and you're still have that emotional defense mechanism to not to the desire to not want to be wrong or to not fail.
Hmm.
And when you self distance and pretend like this is Matt Liggett's problem, it's not my problem, it's Matt's problem. Well, how
Hmm.
would I approach this
Right.
if this were somebody else? So he talks about um, self distancing, and then finally he says, in your speech, avoid certainty types of words. Use words like however, but, although. On the other hand, Benjamin Franklin um, said to avoid certainly, undoubtedly, or any other phrase to give the air of positiveness to an opinion. So to be very, very careful around the language that we use, like, oh, for sure, 100%. We hear
Mm.
those all the time.
Hmm.
The language maybe changes. Like in today's vernacular, it's 100%. I see that
Right.
all the time in
Yeah.
memes, podcasts.
Right.
The millennial generation, that seems to be their word for certainty. So really, really good book. It was really interesting to read. There's maybe one story I'll just finish up with from the book, and then I'll give it a give it my unbiased, perfect opinion. Just kidding. One of the stories that he shares in the book. So do you remember hearing about the bombings in Madrid? I think it was like, what was it, 2014 in Madrid, Spain.
Hmm.
So they had these bombings. Let's see. Uh, yeah, okay, 2004, March 11th, 2004. There was a series of coordinated terrorist attacks targeted commuter trains during the morning rush hour
Okay.
in Madrid,
Yep.
Spain. Okay. 2,000 individuals were injured. So it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, for sure.
The FBI was involved, and they found a fingerprint at one of the sites. So they brought in their top expert fingerprint person, and three-quarters of the fingerprint matched a man named Mayfield, who also happened to, at one point, have practiced being Muslim. Okay.
Hmm.
So they kind of match it, but there was a quarter of the fingerprint that didn't match.
Hmm.
And they overlooked that part.
Hmm.
So it wasn't a perfect match, but it was like a three-quarter match. And they just kept trying to kind of like shoehorn this Mayfield individual into these terrorist attacks. Like, his daughter was studying Spanish, and they construed that to be that he was in Spain at the time of the attacks, and just kind of crazy. Well, it ends up he wasn't involved at all, but he
Right.
was their leading suspect. But going back and kind of, backing up a bit, the FBI realized, like, right out of the gate, they should have just discounted him because his fingerprint was not a perfect match. And the
Right.
expert opinion said, well, this, is close enough.
Hmm.
And so they went on with it anyway. So just be
So
careful, even when you're an expert.
that
My fear
reminds
all.
me. That reminds me of a story. I do like true crime, but we don't obviously talk about that here very much. But there was one story, and I wish I could remember the podcast, but you just reminded me of a little bit of it. They basically said, like, there's this serial killer in Europe, that has killed, I'm making the numbers, but it was a ridiculous amount, like 35, 40 people, and they've got DNA on it, but it's in all these different countries, all these different times. It makes no sense. How could this person, be in Germany one day and then 2 weeks later is in Spain murdering somebody? And then they do the DNA and they're like, wait a minute, this is a woman, this is a female DNA, and they're just shocked. Like, this makes no sense. Like, how's a woman, why is a woman doing this, and how is she all over these different countries at these different times? Well, they eventually find out that the DNA kit, the swabs, were packaged by this lady, or packaged by this company. I think it was in Germany, and this one particular factory worker, was packaging these Q-tips when they were not sterile. So her DNA was on all these different packages of swabs that were sold to different jurisdictions throughout Europe,
Oh,
and it
wow.
looked like she was the
Guilty.
murderer, but
Oh,
she
no.
was just a factory worker, and they were not using sterile swabs. So that's kind of what that reminds me of.
So if you
It's
are
crazy.
a killer, you could just have an alibi, just start
Yeah,
working at a
yeah, that's
Q-tip
for sure. Q-tip
factory.
factory. It's the perfect crime.
Oh, it's terrible.
Anyway, that's what it reminds me of. Is it was just a crazy story. All right, so what do you give the book, and what do you want to apply?
Yeah, I would give it a triple. Uh, Really well written, well documented, well thought out. He does bring up thinking fast and slow. You know,
Hmm.
Amos Tversky,
Hmm.
uh, and Daniel Kahneman came up in the book. Anytime you read about the brain, they're gonna show up.
Yep.
So that was good. There were a lot of different biases. It talks about kind of fact checking, how to kind of decipher BS from truth in
Hmm.
life when somebody's trying to sell you something, ways to get through these mental biases. So I think for me, what I took out of the book, I read this earlier this year in June, and what I take from the book is when you're making decisions, to move slowly, to take your time,
Hmm.
to be humble, to ask for a lot of opinion and thought, and recognize that you're human. It's okay. You're not going to get it right 100% of the time, but the more that you question, the more you bring in outside views, the higher quality decision you're going to make. And that to me is a sign of intelligence when people behave in that manner versus just moving forward as though they are going to be correct.
So what you're saying is teenagers who know it all are the most intelligent people in
Yes,
all the land.
exactly.
Got it.
Exactly.
And
I
the other thing I remember very specifically is pretend this is Matt Liggett's problem. We're going to start selling little bracelets that say WWMD. What would Matt do? Would make a lot of money on that.
I'm gonna make a
So
t-shirt and say this is Matt Liggett's problem.
this is Matt Liggett's
You'll
problem.
be our scapegoat,
Oh, that's great.
which is totally different book. Okay,
Yes. Okay.
what have you got, Matt?
So I
That was an
have,
interesting title.
yeah, the king of the journeyman. Okay,
Okay,
so do you know in boxing what a journeyman is? Does that ring a bell at all?
no pun intended. N- a journeyman in anything is like an apprentice, somebody that's learning the
Uh-huh.
job. Is it like a, a lower end boxer? I don't know.
Yeah,
You got to
kind
tell
of.
me.
Yeah, kind of. So, yeah, journeyman is basically somebody who is there to be an opponent, right? So not somebody who's there to win. It, it's not
Oh,
somebody who's going to be a champion. He's basically kind of a bring your lunch pail to work. I'm going to show up and I'm going to box, but chances are I'm not here to beat you. It's so if you're a good fighter and you've got a lot of talent, right? You want to start off your career with somebody who's not very good, and it's probably pretty easy for you. But eventually, you want to get to the point because if you have the talent, you want to get to where you're being tested, but you don't want to lose. It's really important in boxing to have zero losses or one loss because that's how
oh,
you make money. So there's this group of people called journeymen
no
that
way.
that are there just to be opponents. So again, they're not the most talented guys in the world,
Okay.
um, but they're decent. They're maybe decent fighters. They're going to go in. You also don't want to necessarily. fight somebody who you're going to knock out in 13 seconds. You want to get some practice.
Yeah.
You want to entertain the crowd. You don't want just a bunch of first round knockouts. And so Peter Buckley, let me just tell you a little bit about how I found out about the book. There's a podcast I listen to, and we'll give a shout out to it. It is called Boxing Life Stories, and I should probably tell you who the guy is. His name, I think it's Tris Dixon. Is it the gentleman's name that does it? And he just interviews boxers or promoters, and everybody's got these super interesting stories. Yeah, Tris Dixon is his name, and he's a British guy. So there's a lot of British people that are interviewed, but there's all kinds of people on there. And I mean, he's interviewed referees and stuff. Anyway, I was listening one night, and I was kind of half asleep at this podcast, and this guy starts talking about. Okay, well, let me back up 1 second before I spoil it. How many fights if you had to guess, how many fights do you think Mike Tyson had in his career? Pro
33, 35.
Okay, good guess. I think it's like 56, which is a lot.
I was close.
For him. Yeah, those are actually pretty close. He probably should have had something around 30. He should have fought more.
I was thinking Mike Tyson's Punch Out. I think that's what I was thinking of.
Anyway, so Peter Buckley, he fought 300 times. So 300 fights, which is unheard of. At the time, it was a record. There's I think another gentleman who surpassed him, but he basically, his job was to just go and fight. And so he in the podcast, he just kind of gives a very brief story of his life, how he kind of grows up just fighting, right? As a kid, gets into fights. He ends up like robbing and stealing, and he gets put in jail from the age of 15 till about 20. So he was an amateur boxer before he got into trouble with the law. And then when he got out, there was some trainer that just said, "Hey, you want to get back into boxing?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." And he didn't really think about it. The next morning, he was knocking at his door. It's like, let's go for a run." And he's like, "No, are you serious?" And he's like, "Yeah." So he turns pro when he's 20 years old after spending 5 years in jail. I think before he was in jail, so he would get in fights all the time. Just kind of this rough upbringing. He got into a fight in a park, and he thought this guy was punching him, and all of a sudden he looks down and there's just blood gushing everywhere. He got stabbed with a screwdriver and punctured his lung. So he's just this kind of an insane upbringing. But he kind of gives a lot of credit to his wife, who's his girlfriend, kind of when they were younger, teenagers, they're still together, for kind of helping him turn his life around and turn to boxing as kind of a career and a way to make money. So anyway, I was listening to this podcast, and he talks about how he's written a book, an autobiography called King of the Journeymen, right? Because he's just done so many fights. So of the 300 fights, guess how many he won?
Okay. And I want to ask you a follow-up question here.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so
meanwhile, I'm looking up just to be sure.
Okay, because there's the puncher. I'm thinking of Tyson. You said 55 fights. He's probably like 55-0. Mike Tyson.
He was like 50-6 or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, 50-6. So this guy, if he's the punching bag, he's the one that is coming in just a notch below somebody like Tyson. I would say he's probably like one, maybe 100 of 300.
Okay. So he is 32 and 256 with 12 draws. Okay. So 12 ties. So he's won 32 of his fights.
Dude, and those 32, I'll bet those were awesome fights.
Yeah. So when he started
the ones that he won.
When he started out, it's kind of, it actually, in a way, it kind of makes me sad as a boxing fan, because the more you watch it,
it's rigged.
Boxing fans are kind of abused, right? Like they're all, I'm like basically one step above being a wrestling fan, knowing that it's not rigged, but it is that they do call it matchmaking, right? So it's not like,
yes.
The Cowboys play the Cardinals just every year. That's not how it is. It's like, oh, Zac is fighting Matt. Matt's terrible, and he's going to knock him out in the first round. But Zac needs to stay busy, and Matt can make a few $100 by fighting him. So anyway, but he does start out winning a lot of his fights. Like that's where he gets the bulk of his wins. And after that, he kind of realizes like he doesn't probably have the talent to become a world champion. He did maybe to become like a British champion, but you kind of have to have the right backing. It's kind of, again, this is kind of sad that you have to have the right kind of promotion backing. You have to fight the right people. Um, and he ends up working with this guy. They call him Nobby. I don't know his real name, but that's his trainer. And the name of the gym is Losers Limited, I believe. And so it's almost like a tongue in cheek, like, right, like this is what we do. And there's like a group of probably 8 or 10 of them. They basically are just the opponents that go to Sheffield that weekend to fight all the boxers that are there to kind of get a win on their record.
Okay.
And so his life is basically like he trains, he runs every day, he trains, but basically every weekend he'll get a call like on a Friday and say, "Hey, can you be in Manchester on Saturday? There's a fight. A guy dropped out. Can you be there?" "Yep, sure." "Hey, can you be in Ireland next week? We got a flight for you."
Wow.
"Yeah, no problem." He literally got one that was, I think, like 3 hours. Like, "Hey, this guy pulled out of the fight.
Oh my
Can
gosh.
you be here in 3 hours?" And he's like, "How much is it going to pay me?" He's like, "They're going to pay you this." He's like, "Well, throw in a few extra quid and I'll come." And so, I mean, he just has all these crazy stories where he's just last minute, and he's always kind of like the visitor. So he's going in and getting booed all the time because they want the hometown guy to win. And what was really interesting about it, and it's interesting that you talked about kind of being humble. What I really liked about him is he was very honest with. He wasn't like, "Hey, I could have beat all these guys." Like, very brash. He was. You would expect him to almost be a little bit brash and like, "Oh, this guy totally. I got robbed." I don't know if you've ever watched a boxing match where it's clear that the judges really got it wrong and somebody gets like robbed of the victory. But he actually says like, yeah, he's like, there's definitely some fights where I should have won on points. I thought I won, but I knew I wasn't going to win. You know what I mean? And he calls it having a move about with him. He's like, he knows that he's there to kind of just give them. He almost calls it like a glorified sparring match. Um, and he just talks about how he knows he's probably not going to win, but it's basically his job, and it's in a way it's his job to kind of help these young fighters that have the promise to get better. Does that make sense? And
It's almost like he's raising other people up in their
yeah,
careers in
but
a way.
he was very surprisingly, I thought, honest about it. Like he basically said
Yeah.
like, he's like, yeah, he's like, I probably could have fought for a British title. He's like, I wouldn't have fought. He's like, I maybe could have fought for a world title. I probably wouldn't have won the world title because he did fight a guy who he was beating up and kind of beating up, but the guy won on points. And the guy that he fought went on to fight a world title, got knocked out in 13 seconds. And he's like, I would have lasted longer than 13 seconds. He's
Yeah.
like, I might have made it to the end of the round at least. So
Did
he's
did was he going all out in these fights?
no, not
Or
necessarily.
was he just like, "Yeah, I'm just here to
It,
like
it,
go a few rounds and
in a way,
I'm not gonna risk
it depends.
myself."
It depends on the fight. Well, part of it was if he went crazy and got knocked out. If he gets knocked out, I don't think he can fight for 60 days. And this is his job,
Oh,
so he needs to
okay.
fight next weekend, right?
Yeah.
So he basically would say, okay, he learned how to slow the fight down, to grab, kind of almost do a few cheap shots to keep people off balance. He also said that he would move very little. You were a wrestler, so you know how taxing that physical it can be. And I've
Oh,
just
yeah.
messed around with like punching bags, and it's so tiring. So
Yeah.
he actually says like there would be boxers who'd be like jumping around, and he would just kind of step back and step one foot to the side, so he would conserve energy.
Okay.
Anyway, so he's just kind of he's basically a craftsman, but he's very honest about how his skill level. He talks about, I can't remember who he fought, but he fought like, maybe you've heard of Kell Brook, Prince Nassim Muhammad. He's not a heavyweight. He's a light guy, like a lightweight, so like 115, 120 pounds or something like that. But even then, he still has to weigh the right amount. So he talks about how he would be last minute, so he'd be maybe 3 or 4 pounds overweight, and Nobby, his trainer, would just kind of lift him up off the scale a little bit and he would kind of distract. They would distract the judge or whatever, the
Wow.
official, and then he'd kind of lift him up and say, all right, you're a little overweight, but. And there were sometimes where the opponent wouldn't care, like, oh, he weighs 5 more pounds, but we don't care. We got to have a fight, and we know our guy's going to beat this guy.
Yeah.
So, anyway, it was just really interesting and kind of refreshing that he was so honest. He basically said like when he fought like Prince Nassim Muhammad, he's like, man, this guy, he's like, there's levels to boxing. Like there's guys I fought that I could have beat. This guy, I couldn't beat him. No, on my best day, I couldn't beat him. You know what I mean? So it
Yeah.
was just kind of interesting, refreshing.
I just always it was curious to me. So the question I had for you, when you see an elite boxer like a Mike Tyson that's, I don't know, have 55 fights and it's like 50-5,
Hmm.
or they're 30-0. I always thought that's kind of weird. Like they've never lost.
Yeah.
Do they just like, is it rigged? Are they just fighting people they know or
It,
one
it
below them?
it's
And
not, yeah, not rigged, but
yeah,
it's set up to
favor
have the
one.
to favor them, and it's almost set up to like, here's the other thing, right? Um, if you're really talented but you're terrible at fighting like left-handed people, right, southpaws, then I, as your manager, might not set you up with a southpaw
Right.
for a few fights. Like, or what I might do is say, you're going to fight a southpaw, but he's terrible, right?
Uh-huh.
And so you could get used to fighting a southpaw without the risk of you getting knocked out. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? So
Yeah.
it's really about how your matchmakers and your promoters kind of make the matches in your favor. If that for
Who was it that Tyson fought? That was it. It wasn't. Was it George Foreman or
Holyfield, the one that he
Holy?
bit the ear off.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, Vander Holyfield. So
yeah,
that to me is a fair fight. Like those, they're
yeah, yeah, for sure.
pretty pretty equally matched. But it seems like up to that point, when you get to that fight, you don't want to mess up this pristine record of this
Exactly,
fighter
exactly.
until you get to the world
until you
weight.
can until you can cash in, right? So the first few
Okay.
fights that you fight,
Okay.
they're called club shows. They're right in like a dingy old athletic center or something,
Right.
and you're making 1,000. I make up the prices, but
Okay.
$1,000. And but as you get better and get more entertaining and move up the ranks, suddenly there's going to be a huge pay-per-view prize fight where you're 15-0 and they're 13-0, and they can really cash in, right? So even if you do lose, well, I still made a few million losing, right?
Yeah.
So just to give you an idea, I looked at, and because I knew Mike Tyson's obviously the one that people know pretty well. If you look up who he fought before
Yeah, who is there
before
was a
Holyfield,
there was a
there's like
Peter
there's like
Peter
there's
there
no
was
they're nobodies, right? They're
yeah.
nobodies in at the time, right? They're not well known people. On the other hand, there were people that were afraid to fight him, right? So if you've got somebody who's kind of equal talent or similar talent, um, you don't they may not necessarily want to fight you, right? So it's just kind of an interesting dance, for lack of a better word, of how they make these matches. And the thing that was cool about Peter was he would fight anybody, anytime. He basically never said no. The only time he said no was he was ready to fight some guy who was pretty talented. I can't remember the name, but he ended up getting in a bar fight the night before and like messed up his hand and broke it, so he couldn't fight. There was another time where he was supposed to be in Ireland and he got drunk and forgot about it, and so he didn't make that fight.
Oh no.
What? Oh no, maybe he did make that fight. I think maybe that was the fight where there was one fight where he was hung over and just smelled of alcohol, and the trainer or whatever came to pick him up and said, "No, we're doing this, and here, drink some tea, brush your teeth." And he says, "I don't know how I passed the medical exam, because everyone gets a medical exam before the fight." He's like, "I don't know how they let me through, but they let me fight." The other thing is, if you're a journeyman and you're too good, then you won't get a call back, right? If
Okay.
you knock
Yeah.
out their star, then suddenly it's like, I don't know if we want Peter to come beat up our guy.
He'll blow up your record.
Yeah, and there was one time where one last quick story. There was one time where they said, "Hey, come fight this guy. He's pretty green, so just kind of what he calls it a move about. Just have a move about. Just kind of move around the ring. Make this he's kind of green, so don't kill this guy, right?" And he was I think he was a little bit hungover at the time, and he gives him a left hook to the body, and it kind of like stuns the guy. And like Nobby, his trainer, yells at him in the corner, Peter, knock it off. Like basically, quit beating this guy up, because you don't want to, you want to fight next week, right? Like if you knock this
Yeah.
guy out, then our phone's not ringing. So
Like, yep, yep.
anyway, so it was just it was
The
very cool, interesting look into boxing that you wouldn't normally think about, right?
it
And
it totally makes sense though now in my
yeah,
mind. Like
yeah.
why these boxers that get to the elite level, why they're like 33-0. They're like they've never
Yeah, I mean
lost, you know?
they have to have the talent,
Yeah.
obviously, and then they have to be match made correctly. And it's almost too bad that we look as boxing fans at somebody, we like, oh, this guy's no good because he has a loss or two. It's like, no, he actually just fought somebody good. And
Right.
and like if you two are fighting the best, fighting each other, then like it's exciting for us as fans. So I definitely do not hold losses against people like some people do. Um, and it was just kind of like I said, it was just really refreshing for him to be like basically very humble, saying, "Yeah, I lost a fight." He's like, "Yeah, there was a lot of ones I should have won on points, but um, I get it that I flew over to Germany to fight this guy. They're not going to give me the decision, right? I
Yeah.
have to knock the guy out to win." Sorry, one last thing I'll tell you. He he's a lighter weight, right? He actually was only knocked out 10 times. So and he only has 8 KOs out of his 32 wins. He knocked them out 8 times, and of his 256 losses, he was only knocked out 12 times. So he basically was just like talented enough to kind of just maintain this career for
Yeah.
300 fights, which is just an insane amount. Um, and it was just a really interesting story.
So he has a podcast now.
No, he was on a podcast.
Oh,
So,
okay.
so,
I'm
so
like, how's his brain? Like, there's
So
some
he actually
serious.
talks about it. He's like, no, he's like, I'm fine. He's like, my memory's great.
Wow.
He doesn't have any issues at all. Um, I think part of that is maybe the weight that he fought at, right? He's not like a heavyweight,
Yeah.
where he's
True.
not getting hit. He's getting hit by guys that are, it's all relative, but he's getting hit by guys that are 120 pounds. Um, and in those types of fights where he's fighting somebody that's kind of up and coming, he's only fighting 6 or 8 rounds. He's not fighting like 12 championship rounds with like the best of the best usually. You know what I mean? He's fighting, shorter round, not shorter rounds, but shorter, fewer rounds than
Yeah.
normal as well. So, but it's anyway, very interesting story. I would say the story itself is like a triple, but because he's the writer with a ghostwriter, it's not the most organized and the most thoughtful way to put things together. It's kind of just a collection of stories. So
Okay.
if you're like worried about like reading some masterpiece of you know literature, that's not what it is. But it's a very cool, interesting story. And again, I give the guy a lot of credit for being very honest and humble, and basically saying, because you believe him when he says I this guy was awesome and there's no way I could beat him, and then he says like I beat that guy and I just lost on points, but it's just because I was traveling and I was never the hometown guy. You believe him, right? Because you're like, okay. And he's funny. He talks about like rewatching fights of some of his own fights on YouTube. He's like, that was a pretty close fight. I didn't realize how close it was at the time. And so anyway, very, very cool book. I just gave me a lot of new perspective on what it takes to be a journeyman in that sport. So
Okay. Okay. So what would you give it? What would you?
I personally give it a triple, but if you don't
Okay.
like boxing, or if you're not like committed to a longer book, and it's not that long, but if you just want to listen to the podcast, it's called Boxing Life Stories with Tris Dixon, and the guy's name's Peter Buckley. It's like an hour long, and he basically gives you the overview of the book. You know what I mean?
Okay.
There was a time when somebody was interested in making a film about his life story, and that may possibly still happen. But the rights and rewrites that he got, they said they were way too Americanized, and they're like, this is not British at all. And this guy couldn't be more British, right? He talks, he's like, yeah, this guy's a true geezer on the streets, and you know what I mean. Like just the way he talks was so classically, street British, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, and so if you put anything Americanized in there, it just would not be realistic. So
Yeah. That's such an interesting story. So who is the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time, do you think?
race heavyweight,
You've just shattered like all my understanding of boxing. I didn't even know that somebody had ever boxed 300 rounds,
300 fights, yeah.
300
Uh,
fights,
yeah,
not rounds.
yeah.
300 fights. That is amazing.
I mean, I was my age group is the Tyson, like yours is the Tyson age group, right? So
Okay.
Holyfield and Tyson are kind of as far as heavyweights. But I do like boxing now, so it's fun to watch like Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk. They're fighting in I think in February, so you'll have to come over and watch that.
Okay.
That should be a good fight, because Tyson Fury is like a 6'8" giant, and Alexander Usyk's this Ukrainian guy who's so talented, but he's probably like shorter than I am, and he barely makes heavyweight. Right, he's barely 200 pounds. So
Wow.
he's going to fight some dude that's um, probably maybe 270. That's like 6'8" with a crazy reach. So it's going to be a good fight. But anyway, we'll have a
Okay.
party and
All right.
watch it.
Sounds good. Sounds good, Matt.
All right. Any last words? basically a lot of very different books this time, but interesting that they were kind of about humility, and I didn't expect that to come along. So
Yeah, I think there was definitely the theme of humility. Let me grab a quote if I can.
sure, you have a quote from the book or something you want to wrap up with the book.
Yeah, so this is back to the intelligence trap. So there is one part of the story towards the end of the book. Robson dives into building teams that are too talented. So if you went out and recruited the most talented people, if all the talented people could be on your team, think of like the New York Yankees, right? They've got unlimited budget, can build whatever team, but for whatever reason, they cannot win the World Series every year. Uh, when you have too much talent on a team, the team success starts to go down. And the quote is this. So think about this when you're developing a team. You don't necessarily need the people with the highest IQ, the highest EQ. You need a team that's diverse and a team that works well together and it competes well together. It's not enough to assume that employing the smartest people possible will automatically translate to better performance. You need to create the environment that allows them to use their skills. So I thought that was a really important takeaway from the book is how to leverage different people on your team, their different skill sets, and recognizing that you don't need to have the smartest people or the greatest graduates of Harvard to build really successful teams.
And that's
And
why
I,
you put me on the podcast,
yes,
because I'm not the most talented.
no, 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 because you are the funnest to work with, honestly. But I, in my own practice where I work, the team that I've worked with, some of the team members I've worked with for almost 20 years, and we can go compete together and win more often than we lose because we just work well together. And I'm not the brightest, and they would tell me they're not the brightest, but we work hard and we work well together. And I think when you're creating teams, it's if you can put away the ego, put that aside and work together as a team, that's really how you create these dynasty teams, both in sports and business.
All righty. Thanks, Zach. Great podcast. Remember to like and subscribe. Tell your friends all about it. We're going to work on the bracelet and the Matt Liggett problem T-shirt. And it's going to be this is going to go viral for sure.
All right.
So 100%, Zach, 100%.
Completely 100%.
Completely. Totally.
Certain. That's going to be another shirt. I'm totally certain.
All righty. We are out of here. See ya.
Bye.